Welcome back to Theotokos on Thursday of the second week of Advent. Yesterday we talked about how Mary's emptiness fostered her echo. And as we continue to read in this beautiful exchange between Mary and Elizabeth, as we hear of Mary's Magnificat, we hear Mary glorifying God in her lowliness. Mary says in Luke 1:48 that he has looked upon his handmaid's lowliness. And there's no coincidence. Empty leads to echo. And believe it or not, suffering often leads to emptiness. In his great book, Dawn of the Messiah, Dr. Edward Shree reminds us that the Greek word that Mary uses to describe her lowliness is the word tapision. Somewhat paraphrasing Shree, tapision describes not simply a spiritual humility, but a condition of great suffering. In fact, the word was commonly used in the Old Testament to depict the affliction of God's people when they were persecuted and oppressed, but about to be rescued by God's saving hand. For example, recalling how God once freed Israel from its slavery in Egypt, Psalm 136 says, "It is he who remembered us in our lowliness," tapision, "and rescued us from our foes." As a Jewish woman living during the affliction of Roman occupation, Mary would have lived in the daily cry of a suffering people. The village of Nazareth and the people of Israel yearned for God to save them from their suffering. Suffering is it's a tough reality for a lot of us. And it's dismissed by our culture, yet pervades everyone in it. Few of us embrace it, yet all of us face it. Suffering is a part of life. And oftentimes in suffering, there's a little lie that's whispered that sounds something like, "I'm alone." A lot of times when we suffer, we feel alone. So many of us run from suffering because we fear abandonment more than we fear suffering. None of us wants to face suffering alone. And yet Mary sings of her lowliness. She sings of her tapision. God has chosen her, and she needs not run from suffering. She can remain empty, for God has looked on his handmaid's lowliness. What's your attitude toward suffering? What's your attitude toward your suffering? Toward others' suffering? Ask Mary how she dealt with suffering. For your prayer today, I invite you to pray with Psalm 22. And specifically, Psalm 22 1 to 8 and also 19 to 31. And then close your eyes. See if you can see Mary today. See if you can see her singing in her Magnificat. And then pray this prayer with me. Father, I ask you that I might taste your love for me in my weakness. Help me not to run away from suffering, but to run to you in the suffering. God bless you.